welcome to #GotMoney. COVID's a really interesting, and I keep saying this every time I start an interview. It's a really interesting space for all of us. And I was just speaking to this guest about how okay I am about COVID, but there are some people out there in our community that are not doing okay. And I warmly invite Jeanette Large from the WPI. Thank you for joining us today, this evening. Jeanette, how are you?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yes, personally, I'm fine. Thanks very much. But you are absolutely correct that there's many people out there that aren't travelling as well as we are. And part of that is, I think, as you said just before we came live on air, we were talking about the fact that you've got a nice home, you've got a nice street, you feel very comfortable where you are. There's many people out there that is actually not the case. So yes, I'm very lucky. I've got a roof over my head. I'm living in a safe environment without violence. So yes, I'm travelling well, but many women, that's who we focus on, are not necessarily travelling all that well.
So you're the Women's Property Initiative, Jeanette. Do you want to tell our audience what it is that you do?
So yes, the organisation, we develop and provide affordable rental housing for vulnerable women and children. So it's long-term housing, it's good quality, it's long-term, and it's really does assist the women and children who we house to have new beginnings and really move on with their lives. So the majority of the women that we house have escaped family violence at some time in their life. We're housing women of different ages, right from late teens through to 70s, and I think maybe even 80s. We house the women in homes that are 1 and 2 bedroom apartments and 3 and 4 bedroom houses, depending on their family makeup. And as I said, long-term housing, they can stay there as long as they need to, as long as they want to. So that's what the organisation does.
How long have you been doing it?
So I've been with the organisation for 14 years now. The organisation itself has been in operation for 22 years. So it's been around for some time. And we own and manage properties, but we also manage properties for some other housing organisations now as well, which is terrific because it means there's more housing that we're able to provide, but still not nearly enough. We need tens of thousands of properties to meet the demand, and that was before so many women have lost their jobs, and that's a fact. The majority of your casual and your part-time work in your hospitality areas, luckily, well, not luckily, but many women are nurses and teachers and so forth in your lower paid jobs, but many of the other lower paid jobs, they're the ones that have gone first. And I think it might take some time for many of those businesses to actually open up again and start employing again. So we're expecting a huge demand to approach our service.
I wanted to say that to you. I wanted to ask you, who are you during COVID? Because this is an entirely new landscape for everyone. So how are you as an organisation currently managing this?
So all of our staff are working from home. Our tenancy and property management staff, we did manage to get the personal protective equipment that they need if they go out to visit any of the properties. We've had to put in place a range of new policies and procedures to deal with supporting the women in the houses, and that's for our tenancy and property managers, it's for our contractors, it's for the women themselves. So we will not necessarily undertake non-urgent maintenance in any of the properties. We will make sure we always undertake urgent maintenance. We're finding it difficult to work out a system to actually do the condition reports because we really think it's so important to keep the properties to good standard and good quality. So yes, we are managing. We've put, as I said, lots and lots of policies and procedures in place to ensure that everyone, our staff, the contractors, our tenants are safe. But it does mean that it's not business as usual, that's for sure.
No, not at all. Have you noticed that there's been a spike in demand as a consequence of COVID?
So the number of women contacting our service has increased, yes, but the majority who are in crisis, I think, would go to the homelessness services first before they would come to us. The other thing that we believe is that there's many people out there, women out there, who are being impacted for the first time ever. They're not necessarily knowledgeable about your so-called community or welfare services or where to go to get the support they might need. It was, and another really interesting fact was Safe Steps, the statewide family violence service, found out initially when COVID started that they actually had a decrease in the number of women ringing. But what was happening was there was a huge increase in the number of family violence reports to police. So the women who would normally, maybe when the male perpetrator was out of the house going to work, they'd have the opportunity to ring an organisation like Safe Steps and get the follow-up they need. So many of those women had their perpetrator living with them, not getting the break that they might have needed to actually make the phone calls that they needed to make to a service that could assist them, but the violence was happening and the police were being called in.
Isn't that terrible?
Very, very interesting, not just interesting, yeah, shocking.
Horrendous. I was reading an article this morning and they said the spike would be anywhere between 30% to 100% increase in family violence during COVID. So you're actually seeing it, there's indications of it happening.
So absolutely, definitely indications of it. You're hearing from other services that aren't necessarily the strict family violence services, and as I said, and from the police. So the violence is actually happening, and the women who might normally contact an organisation like Safe Steps, the family violence service, are not having the opportunity to do so.
So there's no reprieve for them either. It's a dreadful situation, isn't it? And the other side of that too is that there are children that are stuck at home now too. So they become, they in essence get a reprieve by going to school, and that's no longer the case for them either. There was an announcement recently around the government providing more housing. Well, they called it shovel ready. Do you want to unpack that a little bit for us, and if that's actually going to help you as an organisation in the long run?
If it actually happens, Elizabeth, that will help for sure. So yes, organisations like ours, and I also believe developers generally, have been asked to provide shovel ready projects, and this is to be considered by the government as part of a stimulus package to get things happening again, get the economy working after COVID-19. So we understand that it's being considered along with other infrastructure projects. So they see construction as very important to stimulate the economy. Whether it will end up being the delivery of affordable housing or not, we still don't know. However, I have heard that developers are more or less being told that they should be considering affordable housing within any developments that they might put up as shovel-ready projects, but we are still waiting to hear whether it's going to happen or not.
It's a shame, isn't it? Because we're talking about I had The Economist on the show, Nikki Hutley, and she said, look, the indications are anywhere between 10 to 15% in unemployment. So that instantly has an impact, doesn't it? Because that's construction industry is the largest provider of work here in Australia.
It is.
Kevin Rudd built nearly 20,000 units during the global financial crisis. And then he went ahead and he repaired 12,000 affordable homes. From the research that I've been doing in reference to shovel ready, it looks like they're committing a lot of this money towards current infrastructure programs that they've already had in the space. And I'll tell you what they are. they were talking about kindergartens boosting the level. They're going to take some of that money to boost the level crossings and accelerate the Northern East Link Road. So it kind of feels like the main need, the requirement, which is social and affordable housing, is really being overlooked. What's your impression?
Well, not sure yet.
Oh, okay.
in a waiting mode, I suppose. It's encouraging that we've been asked to provide and put forward what we could deliver. And when I say we, that's community housing sector generally. So it was, the request came through our peak body, CHIA-VIC, Community Housing Industry Association Victoria. The response was pretty good, and it indicated that we could deliver, I think it was about 3,800 units within about 12 months if the funding was available. So that's how the community sector responded, in saying, give us the money. this is what we can deliver in a short period of time. So that's encouraging. But as you've just said, Elizabeth, we know we are competing with those other infrastructure projects that you've just outlined. So we're waiting. But from our point of view, what could be more important than housing people? Yes, jobs are important, but people need houses. And I know the homelessness services, I just heard the CEO of Launch Housing again this morning, so worried about what's going to happen after COVID-19, when the homeless people who are being housed currently in the hotel rooms, where are they going to go? Where are they going to be housed? Do we just put them back on the streets? We need housing, and
urgently. You know, I was reading a good story this morning about 200 young students in Brisbane giving up their student accommodation to provide shelter for homeless people. Is there any good news? Is it? I had to look long and hard to try and find some good news. Is there any other good news that we can put into the space about what's been going on during COVID?
Well, I think it's not a bad example, is it, that we can house, if we really put our mind to it, then the majority of the homeless people who have been on the streets, many of them for many, many years, are currently housed. It can happen. So why can't it continue to happen? And no, it's not appropriate that they're in hotel rooms on the long term, but I haven't heard of any huge issues in housing the homeless. Often people will say, oh, well, they don't want to be housed, or it's too hard to house them, or, a whole lot of reasons of why they're not being housed. They've been housed. They're off the streets. And when it came down to averting a huge health issue, we found out it was possible. And yes, but we need them to be housed in something more long-term. And yes, they still need the support organisations around them, many of the homeless people. They do need support, absolutely.
As an organisation, have you found that in COVID, have you started to work? I know that with the other housing associations, you work as a collaboration. Has anything changed in the way you collaborate now inside of COVID, or is it still a really strong, strengthened relationship?
No, look, not a lot. I think possibly it's possibly a bit more difficult when we can't meet face to face than because many of us do meet face to face and work collaboratively together. And yes, of course, we can do Zooms and so forth, but I think in the beginning anyway, the majority of the community housing organisations were probably more inwardly focused to start with, in making sure that their organisation was doing all it possibly could to ensure the safety of their tenants, and as I said before, the contractors and their staff. So a lot had to be put in place, and I think from what I've seen, every community housing organisation has just stepped up amazingly to be able to do that, and very quickly. So looking a bit more outwardly and collaborating a bit more, I think might start to happen now.
Now that you've kind of settled in and everything, and all of your staff are protected. So I know that you have a real estate firm connected to WPI. Tell us a little bit about that and what's happened to that in the wake of COVID.
Mm. So look, that real estate agency, to let your listeners know, it's a social enterprise. So it is a for-profit real estate agency. It operates in the private rental market, and it also operates with sales, and it makes a profit. But the difference is all of the profit, 100% of that profit, needs to be redirected back into women's property initiatives. So the not-for-profit charity side of the organisation. So we are regularly trying to build up business in that for-profit real estate agency, because if it creates revenue and profit, it benefits the women and children that we're housing. So it, like in every other real estate agency, I suppose, many tenants have contacted who have lost their jobs as well and have asked for rental decreases, which we've been able to manage to negotiate in most cases between the landlords and the tenants as per the guidance that's been put out. Sales, we were starting to do very well in sales and still doing okay, but I expect the sales may have taken off more than they're going to now. We're in an environment where most people are just sitting back and either, if they've lost their jobs, they can't afford to buy a house. If they were intending to, possibly can't get the loan that they might have expected they could get. So I think the sales side of things, while it will continue, it won't grow as much as we had hoped. But we've one interesting outcome for the real estate agency was we have increased the management of properties, mainly through people who had their properties as Airbnbs. So they were no longer able to lease out their properties as Airbnb. So they've come to the real estate agency to say, well, can you manage our property for 12 months or so?
Congratulations.
Until they can get back to their Airbnbs, I suppose.
That's great. That's great. That's really great. There's some gossip around the first-time homebuyers grant. Have you heard this?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so there's an insight. Now, I want to say this quite clearly so all of our listeners understand. This is just gossip.
Mm-hmm.
But the gossip is that the first-time homebuyers grant will be increased. And it will be increased regionally and in Metro Melbourne and across Australia. We believe we're weeks away from that announcement, because I work in the same sector, so I want the market to reinvigorate. If it increases to the amount that they're speculating, we believe that will rejuvenate that marketplace. So I'm saying that too, because if you're sitting out there on a property and you'd really like a great group to represent you, get hold of WPI. Who's managing that for you internally?
So our current officer in effective control is Rick Macy, and it's been great to get him to come into the business because he actually has a good sales background. So we have our property management is works really well, and we have really great property managers in the organisation. So we're really at the stage where we needed to recruit somebody who also had that sales expertise and experience behind them, and skills and ability, and we've done that. So
fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how else do you make money? How else do you? So you've got the real estate arm, we know that. How else do you fund these houses?
So when there's capital grants available from the government, we will apply for them. The capital grants from government will never provide us with the full 100% of the funding. It's just not the way they operate. So we always need to contribute at least 25%, if not more, to the cost of a new, whether we acquire it, whether we build it, of a new house or apartment. So we do that through also sourcing philanthropy, donations, commercial borrowings. So we're very lucky that we also have a great pro bono contributions to our organisation, which keeps the costs of our developments down. So when it comes to legal assistance, our costs are really minimal. sometimes, you know, if we have to do environmental audits, if we need to get a QS in, if we need to get planners in, we'll often get all of that pro bono, which, yeah, as I said, is a great contribution to our developments when we're doing them ourselves and keeps the cost down. So all of that's counted, but yes, it's a real combination of contributions to get a development happening.
How many houses do you need right now? If you were to look at your current books, how many people are waiting to move into houses?
Well, we no longer have our current books because the Victorian government introduced the Victorian Housing Register, which is the register that people who are eligible can put their names on. Currently, there's 82,000 people on that register, and at least half of those would be women, so probably more. If you spoke to, I mean, we focus on women because we know there's a great need, because we know there's also specific needs that women have that we think is really important. Like, you know, we only have women tenancy and property managers. The majority of our contractors are women. All of those reasons of why we think a women-specific community housing organisation is needed. But if you spoke to the other community housing organisations, the generalist ones, they would say the majority of people they're housing are women as well. The demand from women is huge. So while there's 82,000 on the waiting list, I would say that, you know, maybe 60 to 70% of those are women. So it's a lot. And there would be, look, I expect that will increase, as I said, after COVID-19. There'll be a lot more people who are eligible. Whether they realise they're eligible and put their names down is another thing. Many people might not even realise that they're eligible to be on the list.
What can we do for you? What can our listeners do for you?
Well, the listeners, depending who they are, for women's property initiatives, they can always donate. They can always connect us to anyone who they think would be a good partner for us in contributing in some way. As far as our real estate agency goes, Property Initiatives Real Estate, if they have an investment property that they need managed, they do not, there is no difference to using us as a real estate agency to using any other real estate agency. They're not housing a woman who's disadvantaged or expected to take a decrease in rent. And I would say that the property management, the feedback we get back is it's top class, that they're really getting a good service through our real estate agency. If they have a house they're thinking about selling, why not use an agent, a good agent, where you know that the commission is going to come back into a not-for-profit organisation.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful idea. I think it's a great idea. I love that you've done this. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for hanging out.
Thank you for asking me, Elizabeth.
Yeah, pleasure. I want to end by saying, you know, life, my mother says life is twists and turns. It's full of twists and turns. A lot of those women that you help never believed that they would ever be in that position or that situation. Is that fair, Jeanette?
That's definitely fair, yes. Yeah. And I think there's been some different articles in, you know, Good Weekend magazine and so forth lately that's really highlighted, particularly for older women. Never ever thought they'd be in this situation of needing to be housed in social housing or community housing. Their life has just taken such a different turn.
It's a real stigma to it, isn't there? There's a real stigma to being socially housed, but these are women that have worked hard all their lives. You know, they've taken care of their family. Often it's through divorce and other extenuating circumstances that no stage they ever thought they were going to be there. So to Joy and to our listeners, if you need an agent, please get hold of WPI. Help them get through this, help them build more houses and provide more homes for these women and these children that need shelter. Jeanette Larch, thank you for joining us. You're amazing. I love what you do. I'm so glad we've got you and your team out there housing women. I pray to God one day that I will be in a position where I can do more for you other than offer you just this show. Take care and send my regards and all the best to your team out there that are doing a wonderful job.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. Really appreciate you having us on, Joy.
Pleasure. Take care.
Okay, bye.